I forgive myself. 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 I forgive myself for not living and telling my truth. I forgive myself for abandoning my dreams, my goals, and my aspirations. I forgive myself for making mistakes. I forgive myself for any ignorance that I may have had. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for judging another. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for choosing not to be, to do, to have, to go. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for giving others permission to treat me the way they want to treat me and not the way I deserve. I forgive myself for not valuing myself. I forgive myself for not honoring my self-worth. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for abandoning me. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for bad choices that I made with my health. I forgive myself for bad choices that I made in my finances. I forgive myself for bad choices that I made in my relationships. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for speaking negative words. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for keeping myself bound. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for having distorted perceptions and illusions of who I'm not. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for any hatred that I may have had in my heart or have had in my heart. I forgive myself for operating in fear. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for choosing to believe in lack instead of abundance. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for not honoring my word. I forgive myself for not trusting me. I forgive myself for not loving me unconditionally. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for not truly taking care of me. I forgive myself. 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 I forgive myself for choosing chaos over peace. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for not believing in myself. I forgive myself for not believing in my success. I forgive myself for not believing that I am capable and able. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for appointing people, positions in my life that they were not qualified to be. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for having false expectations of others and even false expectations of conditions and situations around me. I forgive myself. 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 I forgive myself for not operating in love. I forgive myself for forgetting who I am. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for walking away from those things and conditions and people and situations that were for my highest good. I forgive myself for choosing those things, conditions, people, and situations that were for my lowest good. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for lacking the discipline that I needed to move my life forward. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for choosing not to be happy. I forgive myself. 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 I forgive myself for speaking words of destruction, words of death, and not words of life. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for not choosing to be my true, authentic, highest self. I forgive myself for comparing myself to others. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for trying to emulate others. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for not being grateful. I forgive myself for complaining. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for ignoring my own needs and my own desires. I forgive myself. 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 I forgive myself for choosing sickness over wellness and wholeness. I forgive myself for not allowing me to be myself. I forgive myself for not taking my time I forgive myself for not allowing myself to be guided by spirit. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for thinking that things were impossible for me when I knew that they were possible. I forgive myself. 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 I forgive myself for judging others harshly. I forgive myself for judging myself harshly. I forgive myself for being critical of others. I forgive myself for being critical of me. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for believing that God does not love me, that God does not listen to me, that God ignores me. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for not allowing me to be free. I forgive myself. 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 I let myself off the hook. I let myself be free. I forgive myself. 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 And it feels good and it feels amazing. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for not allowing myself to be loved. I forgive myself for not allowing me to be valued. I forgive myself for not allowing me to be truly appreciated. I forgive myself for downplaying me and downplaying my gifts, downplaying my skills, and downplaying my talents. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for angry outbursts. I forgive myself for not taking my time to think through. I forgive myself for reacting instead of responding. I forgive myself for not having the discipline that I need, and even the discipline that I desire. I forgive myself. 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 I forgive myself for taking on other people's issues as my own. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for choosing not to feel like my highest God-like self. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for abandoning my faith, my beliefs. I forgive myself for abandoning me. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for abandoning my truth. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for being distracted. I forgive myself for being led astray from my dreams, my goals, and my aspirations. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for not being anchored in my truth. I forgive myself. 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 I forgive myself.